Listening to all of that is Maria Caulfield, a Conservative MP and Health Minister, who's making an announcement today on more medical school places. Good morning, Maria Caulfield.
Good morning.
Can I draw your attention particularly out of those accounts we just heard to the one of a father whose baby is only 2 months old, and I think whose account you will also have been particularly struck by what his wife went through. He talked about the level of staffing and infection being missed, agency staff. Do you recognise all of that?
Yeah, I mean, just to apologise for his and his wife's experience and to those of your callers as well. I mean, we do recognise that, and that's why over the last few years we've been putting some of the measures in that this report calls for. We know that birth trauma, so basically tearing during labour, is a huge issue for women, and there are ways of reducing the incidence of this, but then better caring for mum and baby after a tear happens. So, for example, we've rolled out already what's called an OAC care bundle across England, which looks at mum's risk factors during pregnancy, so big babies, small pelvises, difficult positions that the baby might be in. Also then, during the labour itself, what measures should be being taken if a woman is at risk of tear, and adequate pain control, managing that, the use of caesarean births, which, for many, many years were frowned upon, which is, the increase in that is helping. But then also afterwards as well.
And I know that you know the health service from the inside because you're a nurse yourself, but can you acknowledge that however much you have done and however good the intentions, it is not sufficient, because that is an account which does not seem to be an isolated account, but it's a current account from only 2 months ago?
Yeah, and I don't know which unit that was in, but there are some units that the CQC have been inspecting and have downgraded, and we're putting in intense support to some of those units, because we do know not just the facilities, but the actual levels of care have not been good enough. East Kent, for example, was one where we had a big inquiry in, and there's a whole team of people there transforming the services there. So we absolutely recognise there are some maternity units across the country.
Is it more than that, though? I ask you that because it seems there are 30,000 women a year in the UK who've suffered negative experiences. We also know, don't we, that we're short of something like 2,500 midwives, and that's felt across the country.
Yeah, so we are increasing the number of midwives. They've gone up by 21%, and increasing the routes into midwifery. So we've got the apprenticeship route now into midwifery.
What's the current shortage then of midwives?
So we've got we've had a 7% increase. I haven't got the exact numbers off the top of my head in terms of how many vacancies there are. But
in January it was supposed to be 2,500.
So, but what we are also putting in is for mums in particular is these perinatal pelvic health services. So again, looking at those women who are most at risk of having a birth trauma. So mums who are having bigger babies, mums who've got smaller pelvises, or other health conditions like diabetes or sickle cell that will make that birth more difficult, and making sure that they're available across England, so that wherever you're giving birth, you have access to those services. We're also rolled out across most of England now perinatal mental health services. As you point out, the PTSD element of going through a difficult birth lives with mum and the whole family for often years to come.
Yes, but often people don't feel able to even really fully recognise or talk about what they've been through, not least because you've got another life to look after. I wonder if you were also struck by the lady who spoke there about how when she gave birth in 1971, and this was the standard practice, that if you had a first baby, you'd have some days in hospital to recover so that you're not going back to housework, to learn to do things like feed your baby. Is there any chance at all of the NHS getting back to that? Perhaps not for a full week, but even for 3 or 4 days.
But if you look at the population of women giving birth now, and all the medical experts would agree on this, that the women giving birth now often have much more complicated needs than, say, in the 70s or the 80s. So women have got much more significant comorbidities.
There's more need for that than less.
So we are, so we have got extensive support now that's going into hospitals. We have got the 6 to 8 week check with the GP. So if mum doesn't recognise that she's struggling, the GP will be able to go through all aspects, both physical and mental, to kind of point mum in the right direction for getting help and support. But women also are slightly older in coming into pregnancy. That puts up risk factors and comorbidities such as diabetes and obesity, which is also in the news today. today. So it's a much more complex scene than it was 10, 20 years ago. But we absolutely recognise that birth trauma is an issue. With the use of the services that we're putting in place now, we can reduce that by about 20% because there are some that are avoidable. There will also always be a case where some mums do tear during labour, but the care has to be much better in terms of infection control, pain control, psychological support. And those services that we are stepping up already will make a difference and, improving the safety of maternity too. We're seeing neonatal deaths and stillbirths reducing by about 30%. So we know we are heading in the right direction.
So, but you said you can't give me any updated figures on what you've managed to get the shortage of midwives down to since January.
Well, I can tell you that in the last year we've seen a 7% increase in the number of midwives across England. We know that there are units in the country. So Cornwall, for example, there's a waiting list for student midwives to start their training.
Sorry, that was a very specific sort of nationwide, or perhaps it was England-wide figure, and you don't seem to have anything on that. Let me ask you then about the specific call that Theo Clark, MP, one of your fellow Conservatives, have made this morning. Will you commit to a maternity commissioner reporting directly to the Prime Minister?
Well, obviously, Thea's publishing her report today, so we will look at that in detail. But
we know already, though, that's what she wants.
But she's got about 11 recommendations in that report, and we are rolling out many of those already, at least 5 of those. So the 6 to 8 week check, the perinatal mental health services available to women in England.
What's wrong with committing to this one?
So we need to look at the report, and we need to look at how the difference that would make. At the moment, as the health minister responsible for women's health and maternity, I directly am accountable to the Prime Minister, and that is why we're investing heavily in our maternity services. This is a priority for the women's health strategy, and the Secretary of State has been very, very clear about that. We're putting in record levels of funding, over £189 million extra a year into maternity services. We're increasing the number of midwives, increasing the routes into midwifery to get that pipeline going. We're focusing on those units that have the poorest performance, and we're seeing neonatal and stillbirth deaths fall. Absolutely, we need to deal with birth trauma, and already the pelvic health services that are rolling out across England, not in Wales where Labour run the health service there, but in England, are making a difference in identifying the most at risk women, supporting women through their birth, and then looking after them properly after their birth if they've experienced trauma, either physical or psychological.
Maria Caulfield, thank you.